Heather Danino, welcome back to the Liberated podcast.
Thank you so much, Carrie. I'm excited to be here again.
It's so great to have you back. So, for those of you who may not remember when Heather was on the podcast last year, she's a longtime public school teacher, taught in the public schools special education, and was a department chair in Massachusetts for, I think, over a decade, right, Heather?
Um,
And then launched Elements Academy on the South Shore, just outside of Boston, in 2020. That tumultuous time was never second guessing, kind of went full steam ahead to opening because she knew it was such an important program. She opened Elements Academy as a state recognized private school, so not a micro school for homeschoolers, although Heather offers homeschooling programs and has all kinds of family wellness approaches to Elements. And she has dealt with her fair share of startup challenges, not only starting in the pandemic year, but even up till today, of just dealing with these entrepreneurial barriers and burdens that I think it's worth talking about, because so much of certainly the emphasis of this podcast is on championing the work that education entrepreneurs are doing, and it's so impactful and it's so rewarding, as Heather will share too. But it's also really, really hard. It's hard to be an entrepreneur in any sector, and it's especially hard to be an education entrepreneur, including those who are really trying to transform education to be much more individualized, learner-centered, and self-directed, which is exactly what Heather is doing. So, Heather, let's start with some of the trials and tribulations of entrepreneurship dating back to your launch in 2020. I know you established your LLC in the fall of 2019 when you really made the decision that this was going to be something that you wanted to do, with plans to open in 2020. And even though we were confronting a global pandemic, you charged ahead. So tell us what that year was like for you.
yeah, what a whirlwind. And also like just to recognize, as I listen to your intro, I'm like, wow, I've done a lot. I really want to recognize that too, because I do want to be able to share more openly and vulnerably with especially your audience is a lot of education entrepreneurs, and it's hard. And also a lot of parents can recognize that like parenting is hard, and it's kind of similar reasons I think that this is hard too. There are a lot of parallels between parenting and running a school. Um, and yeah, the first year really set the tone. I mean, I had decided in 2019, before obviously knowing that COVID was coming and the pandemic was going to shut things down in the way that it did, and we went full steam ahead. And why? Because we needed to. Like, because we need, this needs to exist, right? I needed it for my kids. And and we weren't the only ones, or else we would have just homeschooled, right? So I knew that the community needed it. I knew there were other families, even more so after the pandemic, that were like opening their eyes to, oh my God, this is what my kid's been learning the past however many years, or, this is what's happening, or this is how they're managing behavior. Like, this is what the expectations are. I didn't know that. I mean, there were a lot of parents that just didn't know what they didn't know. Um, there's a person I follow who does micro school online for homeschool community. She's amazing, and she recently posted something about how um, does anyone realize that all these micro schools are being run by former educators, because they've seen it from the inside and they've seen the light go out too many times, right? And I really related to that, because I was like, yeah, I mean, we've seen it, right? But I don't want to see it and say, okay, then I'm going to homeschool my kids. Like, I saw that in more than just my own kids. I saw it in hundreds, if not thousands of kids when I was teaching. And so it was really important, like, no, pandemic or not, challenges or not, money or not, we're going to do this because kids need it.
So, and I remember you saying when we talked previously, Heather, that actually there were some gifts to opening in that 2020 year. Specifically, you said that it made you laser focused on your vision and on what you were and were not trying to do. I wonder if you could talk about that.
Yeah, and that just continues. Like year after year after year, we've got more focus and we learn more. I mean, I we thought we knew in the beginning, but it's almost like parenting. Like you think you're going to be a certain kind of parent, or you think you're going to be like an amazing parent, and then you have kids and you're like, wow, that wasn't what I was expecting at all. So it's like we opened the school and we had our mission and our vision and all these, things, and then the kids showed us like, oh, this is the direction actually that we're meant to go. And following our intuition time after time after time, and that I'm so grateful for that focus that 2020 brought us, but also has changed year after year and gotten even more and more laser focused. But that comes with some pain, because usually the way you learn what you do stand for sometimes comes from being shown what you don't stand for. And when it comes to kids, right, or families that aren't the right fit or that don't align with what we stand for, I mean, we're talking about humans. That's a painful lesson for us, for the other kids, for them. It's a very human business. Like entrepreneurship is hard, yes. And then when you're dealing with like, these real life humans right in front of you and these small humans in front of you, you're like, wow, this is hard. And most importantly, we want every kid to be where they're meant to be. And that's not here for everyone.
Yeah, can we talk a little bit more about that, Heather? Because I think this is such an important point and something I hear from founders, including founders who have had some significant struggles. They'll say, for example, that they took families who they knew weren't going to be a good fit for the learning environment for a variety of reasons, but they needed the money
Yep.
to get going,
Yep.
or they needed to fill the seats. And it ended up being more of a liability
It,
than they wanted. I wonder if you could talk about that.
I mean, it'll backfire every time, right? Like it'll backfire every time because I mean, the essence of being a micro school is being small on purpose, right? So it's super super important who your families are and what the community is that you're building. Um, you know, I don't want to say like a bad apple because I don't think there are bad kids or bad parents or bad families, but like it not being the right fit can be the bad apple. It's just a mismatch, and I think that there are families looking for an escape from traditional school, as they should. But it doesn't mean that they always land in the right place or that they land in the right place right away. And so I like to think of it as like what can we attract to us as opposed to someone, running away from something and kind of jumping into our arms. What can like attract people to us as opposed to just being repelled from something else. But it is hard I mean, especially in the first few years when you're trying to pay the bills. I mean, overhead is high, insurance is insanely high, right? So all these high overheads, and then you want to pay your teachers well so they don't burn out, and because they're doing amazing work and they deserve it. Um, where does that money come from? It has to come through tuition unless there are other funding, like thank God for Vela helped us in the beginning get started. That they just opened up. If people are listening in real time, they just opened up a new round of applicants, and Vela was a huge help to us. We ended up filing as a nonprofit organization to be able to open ourselves up to other funding opportunities, grants and whatnot, but that's like a whole nother full-time job, which no one running a micro school has time for.
Did you decide to do that out of the gate, Heather?
No,
Okay, can you
no.
talk about that? Because this is something else that founders
Yeah.
struggle because it's really quick and easy to open as a for-profit organization like an
Yep.
LLC. But
Yep.
then I hear this all the time that then founders say, oh, maybe I should have been a nonprofit. And there's sort of a process to go through that's not particularly easy. Could you talk about
No,
that?
it's not easy or cheap. Like let's be real about the financial standpoint of micro schools too, is that often we don't have funding just laying around for like attorney fees and filing fees and then even once you get there, I mean, so the process is long, it's drawn out, there's a lot of paperwork, and then you're just waiting. You're at the mercy of the IRS, which recently, so our application took, I'm gonna say almost a year, really, from filing date, almost a year. So that's not even the process that took all the filling out the forms and forming the board and doing all these things.
Bylaws.
Yeah,
Yep, writing the
bylaws
bylaws.
and writing bylaws for something that you haven't yet really formed. You know, I mean, there's a
Yeah.
lot of like, and now we're going back and correcting things that we wrote because in theory it made sense, and then in practice you're like, oh wait, that needs to change, right? And that's the evolution of anything. But it's a long process. It's a lot of time, and it can be costly unless you're lucky enough to find, you know, like an attorney that will do some pro bono support for you or something. But I mean, it can be a lot, and it's worth it. I'm really glad, personally, I'm glad that we took that route, because I want this to be around longer than me. I want it to exist and run, you know, without me someday. And I believe so much in our mission that it felt really right for us to be, you know, like a mission driven, super focused um, organization with,
Yeah.
you know, like let's find that community of people that want to be on our board and that want to support this and that want to go that route. But it's not, I don't recommend it forever. I don't say across the board every micro school should be a nonprofit, for sure.
Yeah, and as I said, you started off as a for-profit. I wonder if you can talk about where that came from for you and the process you went through in the fall of 2019 to launch as a for-profit, and
Yeah.
then what it took to go from for-profit to nonprofit.
Yeah, so the for profit honestly was much simpler. It was much quicker. You can file the LLC online. We had an attorney help us just to make sure we were setting everything up right from the beginning. And with insurance and liability, we're always really careful anytime we're dealing with anything with kids or families. We always kind of take that extra step to make sure we're doing it the right way. But it was pretty quick and easy, and there's not a lot of oversight. You know, that's kind of um, you're doing your own books, you're doing your own thing. And I mean, for profit is an interesting name for it because it's not guaranteed actually that it's for profit, right? We were actually operating at a loss when we made the switch. Making the switch was interesting because it was a process, but we closed the LLC while we were awaiting approval. So we were then just kind of pending for almost a year. We're pending nonprofit. So we'd have to say to potential donors, well, we're pending. So if we get approved this year, yes, your donation will be tax deductible. But we can't guarantee when we're going to get that. So, and then there are grants that are not even available until you've been open as a nonprofit a certain length of time. So, you know, this kind of switch where we thought, okay, this is what we want to do. It's not like it's an overnight, oh, here you go. Now you're a nonprofit and you get all this money pouring in. Like that's not how it happens.
Yeah, it's such a good point. And so you dissolved the for-profit and then sort of awaited the nonprofit. And did you also use an attorney for that
Yeah.
process? I know, again, it's something that people can do themselves.
Yep.
Some people also might go through an online legal source like
Yep.
legalzoom.com, which also can help and set up these different entities. But you
Yep.
went with that same attorney just so you made sure that things were going well. And I
Yeah.
imagine that's a little bit pricier, but you
Yeah.
had more peace of mind.
Yeah. And I had more, you know, there were things that I felt like could save time in the long run because they have templates to kind of, okay, here's a template, change what you need kind of thing, which I'm sure also something like LegalZoom would have. But yeah, I just felt more comfortable having an attorney and accountant kind of like go through the fine print, you know, terms that I would have spent a year trying to Google everything and understand what it meant. That was something that was more important for my peace of mind, for my sanity.
And these attorneys or accountants, these sort of what we call trusted advisors or professional services firms, were they people you already knew? Did you find them through word of mouth? I mean, how would you recommend those listening think about finding professional service providers?
It's so funny you ask that. So I found them through, I had already known them. I was really lucky enough to have already had an accountant who I was doing work with, and she agreed to do additional work with us to get this started. She already knew our books. She already did our taxes, so she already had kind of everything she needed from that standpoint. And the attorney I knew already, but he had been recommended through another school, another private school in the area. And so, and recently I've been talking to other local nonprofits, not necessarily in the education sector, although some are, about how can we share resources with each other? Because all like really small nonprofits, wouldn't it be great if we could all get together and support each other through resources? And so we've started talking to attorneys and other kind of service providers about like, hey, how can you help more of us at a time? Right? Because how can we be smart about this? Like, how can we say all of us are struggling with financial stability of a micro school? So, how can we not be little islands all doing our own tiny little thing in our tiny little places? Like, how can we make a bigger impact?
I love that. Yeah, it's just sort of becoming your own coalition or collaborative network where you
Yeah.
can find an attorney or an insurance agency or an accountant that is familiar with the model and can serve more of you at once. In a way that makes sense for everybody. I love that. So, okay, so we've talked about kind of pandemic opening challenges, which hopefully others listening who are thinking about starting a micro school won't have to contend with.
Hmm.
But some of these other challenges around making sure you have the right families in the mix, that it's a good educational fit for the learners, and then being able to maybe have some tough conversations if that's not the case. The startup process and thinking about the type of entity you'd like to be and finding trusted advisors and then paying for all of that. So funding being a real challenge. Those are
Hmm.
challenges. What else in kind of looking back to those initial startup months would you say were some big challenges?
Okay, the biggest one, and if not the biggest, like it is right up at the top because it is something we struggled with before opening location. And I see it all over, the groups that I'm part of, in the Vela group on Mighty Networks, or a Facebook group of micro school folks at conferences. Like, I mean, this comes up all the time, like location. This varies state by state, and there are definitely some places that are easier than others. But there's like zoning, insurance, safety, right? We've dealt with lead in a building. We've dealt with landlords being horrible. We've dealt with landlords just saying no right off the bat because they don't want a business that has kids, or a business that has more liability, or more, they're worried if they're going to have to like repaint the walls, or what I mean. There's just, and then the expense of a location, right? Like, okay, what are we looking for, and what can we afford, and what is out there that someone's going to say yes or no to, right? And so we've gone through ups and downs of, I mean, we've moved a lot. And honestly, I always remember though, this one parent, I mean, our parents like helped us pack boxes and pack our moving trucks, and the kids helped us. And I said to the one of the dads that was helping us pack, I said, I'm so sorry, but I really appreciate this and the fact that you bring your kids too every time. And he goes, well, yeah, but you know what my kids are definitely going to do in life? They're going to move. So like, this is still part of school and part of life. Like, this is great for them. And I appreciated that so much because he wasn't like, oh, I'm doing this to help you, or, this is obligatory, or this is, it was like, this is part of life, right? People move, things change, things happen. Um, I think this came up with the eclipse too yesterday. Um, I read this thing and I put it on a post-it. It was like, change is inevitable, but transformation is optional, right? Because like change is going to happen. We can't control that. I mean, opening in the pandemic year definitely showed us that right off the get-go. But it continues to present itself to us. And instead of fighting it, we just have learned to go with it, right? Like, what is that presentation to us? Oh, we have to move? Great. I wonder where we're going to end up next. What's that next adventure? You know, and I know a lot of micro schools go through that. And I know really deeply the resistance that can come with that. Um, and I'm not saying don't feel it, you know, for those going through it, like feel it. It can really be difficult for sure. But there's something beautiful on the other side. Um, it's it builds resilience, right? And that, I think when you brought up earlier how the pandemic helped us get really laser focused, like these moves for us that we've gone through, every single place we've had the school, we now write down like, oh my god, what did we love about that, right? We're doing our own little manifestation of like, what did we love about that? Like, what would we want to bring into that new space? What
Yeah.
did we love about it that can carry on? And what did we love about it that we have to say goodbye to? Like, what part of that was a chapter that we move on to the next chapter? What part of it is a character that's going to continue to weave through our story? And what part of it was like, that was then and this is now? And it gets to be a really beautiful mess.
Yeah, I love that. I love that optimism and that feeling that, well, the next place is going to be even better. And I definitely hear that, especially for founders who may be looking at, dozens of locations before they find one, before they open, and then maybe some heartbreaks along the way of falling in love with certain locations that didn't work out. And then they inevitably say, well, I'm so glad we ended up where we are. And so I do think that there is reason for optimism, but there's also a lot of disruption, right? That you lose some families when you
Yes.
change locations because distance could be a factor. And it's expensive. All of a sudden, you have to come up again with first and last month's rent and security deposits, all of these things. So it can be really challenging. And I think maybe sort of stepping back to location from the beginning, Heather, what did you find in as you started? Because I recall you renting or leasing a church space
Yep.
initially, and how did you find that space, and what was that process like in that location?
So we had, even before the church, we had actually found an office space, a big office space. And when COVID hit, we that was one of the first things to change because we had
Mm.
projected running a lot bigger than how we decided to actually start, because we were going to start, we had four different programs in mind. We were going to do full-time and part-time and hybrid and all this stuff, and then COVID hit and we were like, whoa, let's simplify. What do we absolutely need? And it is not a $10,000 a month rent. Like, that was not something that we could hit. So we got ourselves out of that lease that we had signed like days before. I mean, it was kind of a disaster, to be honest. And I do tend to put an optimistic spin on everything, but let's not underscore the fact that like so much of this has been truly, I'm not always like rosy glasses like
Can
this.
can I interrupt you right there then?
Yeah.
Because obviously that disruption from that initial office space and kind of your initial vision of the programming was really a direct result of COVID. Like this would have
Yeah.
happened in a different space. You would have been presumably still in that office space. So let's
Yep.
let's go back to that time before COVID hit when you found this office space. I often hear from prospective founders and they'll say, I want to get started, but I don't have any money. I can't find grants. I can't get a small business loan. What do I do? And often being an entrepreneur, what sort of separates entrepreneurs from everyone else is that you assume the personal and financial risk and hopefully personal and financial reward of running a small business, which sometimes means putting up your own money.
Yep.
And I wonder if that was your experience too.
Yeah. Yeah, we did. We put up my own money, our own money. I have the best husband in the world, and he is so supportive of this. Yes, you could say because, well, they're his kids too, right? Like he wants his kids to be experiencing all the rewards that we get from the school, but it's not just about that. It's about the vision. But that vision definitely comes with a cost. I mean, we had to, make choices and make a lot of sacrifices, and we continue to make a lot of financial and personal sacrifices to be able to have this school open.
Yeah.
And I I would do it all again. I would do it all again in a heartbeat. I will continue to do it again. I mean, like, hopefully we're running at a profit someday, right? And we're like, money is just pouring in and we're getting grants and funders and all this stuff, right? Like I can set that intention, but the reality is right now we're still making massive sacrifice.
Yeah.
Um, and I wouldn't trade it for the world, but I don't want to sugarcoat it for those going through it because I think there's this kind of shame attached to like, well, are we successful as a school? Are we successful as a business? Am I doing the right thing? There's like all those voices and in your head, and there's also voices in society saying what you're doing is not the norm, right? It's going against the grain. So like, just don't do it. Wouldn't it be easier if you just didn't do it? Wouldn't it be easier to just send your kids to school? Wouldn't it be easier to just like do what everyone else is doing, right?
Really interesting. So, Heather, what would you say is the biggest benefit that you've found or reward that you've found for being an entrepreneur? And what do you think is the biggest downside of being an entrepreneur?
Oh, okay. The biggest downside it's it might be the same thing. Okay, like I'm a Virgo and I am like super type A, like want to control everything, and it's letting go of control. Like I have to at some point let go of control and kind of surrender to like not knowing the next location, not knowing what entrepreneurship is going to bring, not being able to control. From the beginning it was the pandemic, and for today it's a million other things, right? Like there are things we can't control, and I have to just surrender to that. And so that's probably the biggest difficulty, but also potentially the biggest reward because there's some freedom in that. And the beauty of watching, like, if we can model that for the kids, what more could we ask for them to learn, right? Like, we want, our school in particular, and every micro school has its own kind of flavor and its own kind of like passion and like the blood that runs through it, right? And our passion is like life matters. Like life matters, and we want to live. We're not just getting by. We're not just surviving. We're like really actively living as much as we can. Finding every kid's unique path and following our heart and following our intuition. And that can only come through what they're watching us all experience day to day. I still remember the day a kid's mind was blown when one of the teachers said, I don't have work tomorrow. And they go, oh, what do you do for work?
Ah,
And she goes, I work here. And they're like, oh, this is your job? She was like, yeah, like they it's deconditioning these associations that like some people, most people don't like their job, and everyone here loves being here. They think that we're
right,
here to hang out.
right. Ah, I
So
love
it's,
that.
yeah, I mean, it's just like it's life. It's getting to live life with
Right.
these amazing humans.
And what about your experience doing what you're doing now compared to when you were a public school teacher? What is that?
Oh, ugh, I can't even. Okay, this is the way One of the first years we were open, I gave like a little bag of stuff to the parents at the beginning of the year, and one of the things I gave which I would do every year if we didn't have the same families. But they're like, I know we've already gotten your fish. But it was a fish. It was a little like bobblehead, cute little fishy thing. But the whole thing was that I felt like when I was teaching, it was like being in a fishbowl. Like you could like do things that it was so confined and it was so structured, and you were supposed to just, I mean, like literally a school of fish, right? Like it was just like herding and watching sardines try and like just only do the tiny thing that they could do in their tiny little fishbowl. Um, and then it was like the fish is out in the wild, and it's like just living within the coral reefs and within all the beauty that it's supposed to experience. Like these kids are just getting to experience life and not in a fishbowl. And I felt really, I felt constantly like I was trying to swim upstream. I felt like I was in the wrong school of fish. Like I was always like the weird one that was like, why are you trying to like, find what the kids really need? What my the quote from my special ed director at the time was always like, you don't have to give them a Cadillac, you just have to give them a Ford. So it's like that didn't feel right. And we sometimes have to experience that doesn't feel right to then find what does. And I lived that when I was teaching, and then I lived it again watching my daughter. And I know I told the story on the last time I was on the podcast about my daughter in kindergarten. Like she could have followed that same fate. Like she could have been a fish in a bowl, and I didn't want that for her.
Mm. Well, and just the gifts that you've given to other children. I've talked to some of the parents of kids in your program. Everyone is just so grateful to you as an entrepreneur that you took the risk and that you made the leap into something that's really challenging, that's very, very hard, but is so rewarding and so transformative for
Yeah.
so many of the learners and the families that you're serving. So you're 4 years into this journey now, Heather. And still lots of bumps, lots of challenges. What do you see as some of the biggest challenges in the near term for you?
Yeah. I mean, I wish I could say that they were different challenges, but they continue to remain like very similar, but just
Mm.
different, like different presentations of them. I mean, we will continue to struggle financially because we want this to be really accessible for families. I don't think it's fair that families have to pay for what their kids need. Like, I don't think that what we're doing is so crazy or so different or so outside the box. It doesn't feel fair to me. And that's frustrating, right? Because I want this to be accessible for as many families as I can. I want families who are the right fit, who really want this, and I don't want to have to care whether they can afford it or not.
Mm.
And the reality is, we do have to care, right? Because we
Yeah.
do have to pay the bills, and we do have to cover payroll, and we have to continue to figure that out. So that's a continued journey. Like the financial stability and the money and all that just continues, and I think it will continue. Um and I think every micro school is going through that, right? Like, how do you make it accessible while also paying who needs to be paid?
Right. I think that that's a big challenge, especially for micro schools that do want to stay intentionally small, that do want to have a highly personalized learning environment, and that do want to be lower cost than traditional private schools. And certainly we're seeing progress in states that have implemented universal school choice policies that enable families to access a portion of state education funding to use at micro schools like yours, but not in Massachusetts yet, hopefully someday. So that's a challenge. And then, I wonder too, I guess, how many students do you have now and how many staff are on your payroll?
Yeah, so we have 18 students and 5 staff. And so I mean, right now we're averaging like a 4-to-1 ratio. We usually hang out around like 5 or 6. We're happy around 5 or 6, at the most up to 7. So we keep our ratio super, super small because not only do we individualize everything, like learning is completely, everyone is on their own path, but we also think connection is super important. So as connection is one of our kind of core pillars, you can't connect when you have too many kids in the room or too, like, so we need to get to know every student really, really well. um, so we are looking to grow. We are looking for more families that are really, really invested, and that are ready to just watch their kid thrive and then watch their whole family thrive.
Yeah. So as we begin to wrap up, Heather, I'd love to hear, what are some of the challenges associated with growing? And, obviously you don't want to become a large private school. That's why you're a micro school, but, incremental growth would be welcomed. What are some of the challenges with that?
Yeah, I mean, we went through this from year 2 to 3. We had a big jump in enrollment, and you would look from the outside and think like, oh, that's great, right? Like more kids, more tuition, or more growth. Like that's the direction we wanted to go in. It it presented its own challenges because it presented families that couldn't afford it. So we were giving away more scholarships than we had money for. Lesson learned. Don't do that. And I've had a lot of people give me like the hard, like, you cannot give coupons, right? Like we have to be mindful. And now being a nonprofit, it's now a board decision. So it's not my decision, like, oh, okay, you can come to the school for a reduced cost. It's a board decision. So that's a better fit for us, because I would give everyone like the shirt off my back. So that is with growth comes like, okay, how are we growing? Is it the right fit? And can they afford it? And if not, what do we do? And where's the money coming from? And what can we do there? There's also growth with staff, and it's really hard. Like the staff we have right now is amazing. But just like we've had parents and kids that aren't the right fit, we've had teachers that aren't the right fit. And so, I heard on a conference, it was for early childhood, but it was like nobody is better than a warm body. Like it's better to have like less teachers than to have like a warm body. Like you're just there to be like right? Like what we're doing is really important. So we need really, really awesome educators and really awesome humans here.
I love that. Okay, so final word of advice or encouragement for founders who are dealing with the trials and tribulations of education entrepreneurship. What do you say to them?
Find your people. Find your people. Like and just keep going, because it's worth it. But what about it makes you want to do it? Like, and get close to that. So for me, when I'm having a hard day, I go and hang out with the kids, even though it's probably the last thing I should be doing, like, quote unquote, because of the paperwork and the amount of like administrative stuff I need to do. But the closer I can get to the kids, the more I remember what I'm doing and why I'm doing it, and then the quicker I get through the other stuff that needs to get done. So like always get back close to the mission and to why you're even doing it in the first place, and that'll help you keep going. And also find your people. I mean, one of your podcasts I listened to, Carrie, about the group, I think it was in Southern Florida, that a bunch of
Mhm.
micro schools got together and they're supporting each other. Um, and then I listened to a podcast of yours right after, and they weren't back to back, but it was a micro school that's close to me here, close in location. And so I was like, oh, this is it. Like we can start, finding our people and building our crowd of supporters and of people who are going through it, and how can we support each other, and finding your people of like the parents, the teachers, the kid, like just build those people that you need around you. That's so important. I couldn't do it without these humans that are around me.
I love that. So,
Yeah.
Heather, if my listeners and viewers want to know more about Elements Academy and sign up for your newsletter and follow everything that you're doing, what is the best way for them to do that?
The best way is probably just going to the website, elementsacademy.org. We try to update it often and keep it as user friendly as we can. I'm always available by email. I've had so many emails from being on your last podcast I've
Oh,
had
good.
calls with people. I've had like, and there's been some parents that have found us through the podcast, but a lot of other founders where I've been able to just be a cheerleader for them and help them. So I'm always happy to hear from people. So Heather at elementsacademy.org is my email. The website, elementsacademy.org. And I'm going to be starting to offer a lot more parenting support. So parenting for the new paradigm, and that'll kind of stay tuned. If you're on the Elements newsletter, you'll start hearing about that too. But just trying to offer more support for folks to step into this new paradigm of like living life.
I love that. And I really look forward to seeing you in person soon at the
Yep.
National Hybrid and Microschools Conference down in Atlanta, and wish you all the best
Thank
with your
you.
continued successes despite entrepreneurial challenges
Yep.
at Elements Academy. So Heather Danino, thank you so much for being on the Liberated podcast.
Thank you, Carrie.